that somehow that little bit of eye contact and a handshake is going to magically build all this trust that can't be done through other forms of interaction. And and the overall response was not that great, but when they looked at the cost per lead or the cost per sale was a fraction of what it was. It was like 25% of what it had been in some of the other channels. At least 40 to 50% of the time that you're spending on your blogging program should be spent off blog. My name's Scott Allen. I'm the Entrepreneur's Guide for About.com, and I'm also co-author of the Virtual Handshake, Opening Doors and Closing Deals Online, which is the first book to look at how not just the tech industry, but how people in a wide variety of industries and a wide variety of business positions and business roles are using we were calling it then social software, but what's now come to be known as Web 2.0, to actually get business done, to hire and recruit, to find jobs, to do market research, to accelerate sales, to generate leads, to do business development and strategic partnering. So looking at it across all business functions and really how this is a trend, and not just looking so much at the technology, but looking at the soft skills, the human skills, the how do we, whether we're sending a private message on Facebook or whether we're sending email or whatever, how do we do things that strengthen relationships? How do we do things that, how do we do things like, how do we broach the subject of actually presenting to someone about our business without coming across as too forward? So all of the soft skills around the relationship aspect of interacting virtually in a business context, business networking virtually, for lack of a better phrase.
Sure. And how did you come up with, okay, so you decided to write a book, but backing up from there, you must be generating content already that kind of triggered that. Like, what was the inflection point where you said, I need to turn this into a book?
Actually, and kind of a rare thing, it actually did go the other way. It was, for us, when I left my last company, which was in the tech industry, it was an enterprise portal company. I decided what it was that I wanted to do next. I kind of looked at several different trends, and I narrowed it down to three things that I was really passionate about that I thought were also hot trends, and I said I could only pursue one of them, so let's pursue one of them. And that's the one that I felt I was in the best position to be a thought leader. I wasn't a little bit behind the curve already, and could kind of ride the wave from the outset. And I said, well, I got to write a book. So I started writing the book, and actually had a co-author, and then found another co-author, and then shifted the co-authors, and that's a whole other story to itself. But we wrote the blog as we went along because we said we need to be out there and participating and engaging. This isn't a book you can write in stealth mode. When you're talking about being engaged in social media and social networking, you can't write it in stealth mode. So we need to be out there, we need to be engaged, we need to be blogging, we need to be posting, we need to be running a group within one of these social networking communities, and be engaged and have firsthand experience besides the research and other stuff that we can compile. So the book was there as the overarching thing all along, and I was doing consulting and doing writing in the process of writing the book. And of course, some of that ended up in the book, but the book was the vision all along. So.
When dealing with clients, what sort of challenges do you see? Are there any kind of trends you see as far as how people understand social networking today, or where's the web today when it comes to that?
Yeah, there are several challenges, and it really depends on who the group is. There's been a lot in the media lately about how some corporations are actually locking people out of Facebook and MySpace and stuff and not letting them use it in a business context. So if you start talking about going to larger companies or more traditional companies, you obviously you can run into that kind of resistance. Just the matter of, isn't this going to be a complete waste of time? Okay, so overcoming that is one aspect. Certainly for a lot of people, there are a lot of people who, as one New York Times writer, fetishize face-to-face contact. That somehow that little bit of eye contact and a handshake is going to magically build all this trust that can't be done through other forms of interaction. So overcoming that kind of resistance, our take on that and looking at all the research on that was really that most of those limitations are self-imposed, not really inherent limitation of the medium. So getting past your own limiting, your own limiting thought, your own limiting paradigms about what virtual communications can be, that's a big thing. But so I think those are probably the two biggest things. How do we do it so that it's actually productive? And so that it's actually productive and not just a waste of time, and it actually supports our business objectives. And then, is this stuff for real, or is it just, a feeder into real interaction? And, my experience, I actually had one client I closed for a several $1,000s consulting deal. Then I actually closed the deal, not even having spoken to them on the phone. The first time we even spoke on the phone was for our project kickoff meeting. Everything else was done via email. So, that's sort of an extreme example, but it can be done. It can be done if your approach to relationship building is right.
Right. With corporations, it seems like a lot of the businesses that are here are trying to figure out how they can throw money at a problem. How does that work with social networking? It seems like it's a different kind of paradigm there.
It is a different kind of paradigm. It's so funny because they'll sit there and talk about the time cost of employees participating in it and then throw hundreds of thousands of dollars at other media channels. And it's like, what would it really cost you to have 20% of your company allowed to spend an hour a day on these sites really engaged in a business context? Okay? And so, when you actually do numerical comparisons, it really wouldn't cost that much to implement an intelligent social media strategy. I remember seeing one case study that had been done about blog engagement, and what the company that did it found was, they had a very small response. And the overall response was not that great, but when they looked at the cost per lead or the cost per sale was a fraction of what it was. It was like 25% of what it had been in some of the other channels. So yeah, they weren't huge numbers, but the effectiveness of it relative, the ROI was tremendous compared to some of the other channels. Because it doesn't cost that much to run a blog. There just aren't as many. There aren't as many intermediaries. That's the whole thing. It's about is what's been termed disintermediation, right? And by eliminating those intermediaries, you cut out a lot of costs. So,
I've heard of people who are with corporations starting blogs and then becoming frustrated because the traffic is so low. Where I was wondering, is this something where the traffic's low because the audience they're actually really trying to target actually isn't that large, or is it something where they just don't have a compelling message on their blog, or how do people figure out what amount of traffic, or how should they be measuring success?
Yeah, there are several ways to do it. Both of those are things that can happen. Certainly, the numbers. Again, who cares if you're seeing 10 times, if you're seeing a tenth of the traffic that you expect, if your conversion rate is 20 times from that, or even 5 times. If your conversion rate is significantly higher, and you're really effectively reaching a particular niche target, then who cares what the total numbers are? So it doesn't have to be big. The question is it being effective for the dollars and the time that you're spending in it? And it will also, and hope, that if it's done right, it'll grow. So that's one thing. Is they may be expecting larger numbers than, if they're comparing it to an infomercial, the numbers aren't going to be, the numbers are going to be typically going to be an order of magnitude or two smaller. I think another big thing though is that a lot of companies don't realize that it's more than just publishing the blog, because they put the content out there and they expect that because they're a name brand that everyone's going to come to it and want to read it. It's like, XYZ company now has a blog, let's go see what they're saying. That's only half the strategy. At least half of the time, and I'm involved in, I run 4 blogs, and 2 of them are part of 2 of them are part of blog networks, where we constantly get training from people who are experts in pulling in blog traffic. And they said, the thing is, most of them will be saying that, most blog experts are saying that at least 40 to 50% of the time that you're spending on your blogging program should be spent off blog. Okay, not just in producing your content, but in going to other people's blogs and posting comments and reading and using that as sourcing for your own writing, so that when you write, you're sending trackbacks and engaging those people and emailing and inviting them to be part of your podcast, and going and interviewing them. Those sorts of things are, it should be where you're spending at least 40 to 50% of your effort, not just on the blog presentation and content itself.
What about other traffic generation strategies? Do you think there are types of advertising, for example, that people could use to drive traffic into a social media platform? For example, if they have a blog or if they have something they're trying to, some video they've created that's very compelling, what strategies do you think are most effective?
Sure. There are, obviously you got all kinds of cross-channel marketing opportunities. If you're doing a video, it should be driving people to, use the video to drive people to the blog. That gets them, keeps them engaged without them going directly to a hard sell. Okay, that gets them in there and gets them engaged. Some interesting technologies that are happening now are ones where you can actually control the landing page, so you send people directly there after watching the video. Those sorts of things are good opportunities. Have had great success using social networking to drive people to my blogs. So being engaged, at about.com, where I write about entrepreneurship, okay? On Rise, which is social networking, it's a business-oriented social networking site, I actually run the Entrepreneurs Network on Rise, which has about 10,000 people. So, I sit there and post links, when I have new articles out and stuff. I don't post everything because it would just get, oversaturated. But anytime I got something I really want to create some draw to, I post there, and it's one of my major non-search referrers to my site.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about about.com. What can you tell us about, how did you get involved in it? What's it like to write for them?
Well, actually, my first exposure, I've been a reader of about.com for many, many years. There are a few particular topics, they've got one of the best urban legends sites around, so I'd used that for a long time. And I had met one time on a flight, I sat next to one of the French language guide, and had talked to her about it for a while. And it had been a couple of years before, but when I left my last company and was going back solo, I said, I really need a platform to build my credibility and to build my audience. And I said, I can sit there and go create my own site, start writing stuff from scratch, or I can go and basically co-opt my personal brand with an established brand like about.com, and I can get handed tens of thousands of readers handed on a silver platter, and I get paid to market myself in the process, talking about what I love. So I went and looked at what the open topics were on about.com. One of them was entrepreneurship. I said, I know entrepreneurship. So I went and applied, and that was, it'll be 5 years this November. So
really?
Coming up on 5 years there.
What's the process like when you're writing for about.com? Is it any different than writing for your own blog, for example?
Yeah, it is. It is different than writing for my own blog somewhat, because we have we're part of the New York Times, so we have some stricter conflict of interest policies and some of those things than I might have personally, because personally I'm like, hey, if you're reading my personal blog, I'm upfront and open about everything. I'm going to be transparent. I'm going to let you know when people are my clients and so on and so forth, but I'm not even going to worry about the appearance of conflict of interest. As long as I've disclosed, I don't care, because you either trust me or you don't. I got to hold to a little higher standard than that when I'm doing stuff with about.com. So there are a few things like that yes, I got to be a little more careful about. But for the most part, About has a unique situation. We really are some of the first and still certainly the premier entrepreneurial journalists on the internet. Even before we had blogs to do it, because my compensation is based on how much traffic I drive to the site, and some of it comes from search engines, but a lot of it comes from repeat visitors. So yes, I'm trying to catch on hot search trends, but I'm also trying to engage people and get them coming back and get them reading more than 2 or 3 pages while they're on the site. So, and because it's monetized at a pretty good rate because they've got established advertisers, I'm very, very thoughtful about the fact that it's different when I know that I think about things a little differently when I know that something I write is going to draw 50 to 100,000 page views versus 5 to 10,000. So yeah, there's definitely some differences.
Cool. You have a question there? Why don't you just ask the question?
The peer-to-peer world, how does that relate to social networking?
The peer-to-peer world?
Yes.
Well, the peer-to-peer world, it's interesting because there's actually, it used to be that it was music sharing and basic file sharing that was going on, and that was about it. But now we're looking at things of, I'm looking at dealing with things for like peer-to-peer collaboration, and how do we do? I have one of my clients that we're looking at peer-to-peer collaboration solutions because we're going, how do we deal with a situation where we have a whole bunch of people who are a virtual team distributed, a bunch of them working on laptops, and how do we sit there and get them to work on on creating a document together? So so we're looking at Groove and some other things, and there's definitely I think there's definitely some potentials there. For the most part, at least within the space I deal with, peer-to-peer is simply an enabling technology, and it's pretty, it's pretty transparent. It doesn't matter a whole lot to me whether it's for most things, if I'm trying to share big files, whether I'm going peer-to-peer or whether I'm going through a hosted free service. It's simply an enabling technology. In the same way that, that email and private messaging and social networking, I don't care which way it comes in, it's just a way for me to communicate. So peer-to-peer is not a big deal in the sense that it's not, it is simply one more tool in sharing information. There's a few times where it's uniquely appropriate and other times where it's not.
Kind of speaking that same thing with radio as a media. Part of the direct response here, radio is one of their medias. Radio seems to have done nothing so far they already have an audience, but they've done nothing with social networking on the web. They don't really seem to understand it.
Well, yeah, there's internet radio all over the place.
Right.
There's internet radio is there are a lot of people putting a lot of time and a lot of money into internet radio. I have not yet seen a lot of compelling data saying that it's actually doing anything for anybody.
Yeah. What about traditional radio using the internet? So you have like your local radio stations. Should they be leveraging their websites to build their own social networks or tie in advertising and that side of thing? Or?
Yeah,
because they have regular following.
Yeah, exactly, and there is that potential, and for the most part, I haven't seen. I've seen a few. There are a few things that are starting to do. That they're starting to do some more listener engagement. Being able to do things like post your own little playlist or whatever, and it might get picked and it'll get announced that if you picked it. I'm like, well, wouldn't it be more interesting if you could make your little playlist and anyone who wanted to could go to your website at any time and hear that playlist? That would be a lot more interesting, right? So, and when you look at what's going on, like with Social.fm and Mercora and some of these, web-based social radio, it's like, the wake-up call. I think that I think the internet and some of the things that are literally happening right now, companies that have just come on within the last 6 months are going to seriously disrupt. They're going to seriously disrupt the radio industry.
When I look at social networking and blogging today, I see the success stories that I see are mostly tied to like longer sales cycle type events, such as an IT company that's selling expensive software. They're benefiting because they're building a lot of trust through their blogs. But can you think of an example of for the direct response type sales where social networking has really benefited that type of transaction?
Well, the thing is, you got to have something that you can keep writing about for months, and once or twice a week for at least for forever. So, how many single products that are simple enough to sell in a 2-minute commercial, have that much interesting to keep writing about for, once or twice a week for every 2 months. So I think there is a challenge there. I think you're going to have a hard time sitting there creating a blog just around one product, expecting that it's going to drive the typical kind of direct response things. But when you start talking about, like the guy from Shop NBC, was talking about having this relationship over time where they've got multiple products. They've got multiple products, and they've got predictive analytics where they can see what's the thing that this person's most likely to buy. Okay, have a blog that's talking about all these different products, and have that engine in a related posts widget. Okay, that based upon what product what they're reading about right now shows related posts about other products that they're likely to be interested in. Why not put the same analytic engine behind the content engine on the blog? That then starts getting really, really interesting. So I think you absolutely can do it. I think you've got to have a deep enough or broad enough offering to be able to keep producing content on a regular basis. Cindy Crawford is talking about her infomercial. It's 5 years old, and she's just now doing another one. You can't do content every 5 years.
It'd be tough on the web.
In social media. So you've got to decide, if how much that's really a fit for you to actually be producing that if you have a very limited product offering.
Mm-hmm. So people who want to get their feet wet, where should they start if they want to experiment with social media? Should they start by starting a blog? Should they start by joining other groups? Or
I would start by reading, getting and participating, and identifying where the first thing is. The biggest lesson about social media and social networking is, yes, you can create your own space that's sort of the center of conversation, but the conversations are already going on. Whoever your target market is, there are people talking about weight loss. There are people talking about regulatory risks. There are people talking about skin care, and they're already in these communities having these conversations. That's the first thing you do, is you go and get authentically engaged in the communities that already exist. Because until you're actually in there, until you're actually in there looking at it in the context of your product, there's no consultant who's going to come along and really be able to get a good in-depth idea of how does your product fit in this particular space, and what's the gap, what's the need between the conversation that's already happening and what you have to offer, and how are you going to ease into the conversation. They can help you with it, but you're going to have someone who has the deep product knowledge about your products there and engaged. Mm-hmm. And that's what so like when I work with people, I guide them through doing that themselves. I can't. If someone who sits there and says, I'm going to go do that analysis for you and hand you a report, can't do it, because they don't know your product well enough. They don't know your product well enough to sit there and really honestly do the gap analysis to be able to sit there and say, this is the conversation that's not happening. This is where the opportunity is for you to step in and join the conversation in a way that's unique and compelling and engaging.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, hey, man, thanks a lot for your time, Scott.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, James.